They strapped her down and turned up the current, expecting a scream or silence. Instead, the EEG began to draw patterns not seen in any human brain. The room froze, not out of empathy, but because something inside her was broadcasting back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started in Facility 39, an off-grid neural research base buried beneath the Couldn Mountains, a region known more for its earthquakes than its ethics. The woman strapped to the gurney was listed as Subject K-12. No name, no next of kin, no documented past. She was found in the wreckage of a satellite crash site 3 years earlier, alive, unconscious, and oddly untouched by fire or impact. The authorities turned her over to the wrong people. Dr. Cale Murrow was the lead neurophysiologist overseeing the cognitive recalibration experiments. To outsiders, that meant treating PTSD in high-risk patients. In reality, Facility 39 was a black site running cognitive override trials, testing if shock-triggered brain responses could be used to rewrite memory, suppress resistance, or even remotely activate combat responses. The funding came from untraceable defense contracts, and the subjects? Ghosts, or people turned into them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. K-12 had been unresponsive to all stimuli, silent, eyes open but empty, heart rate steady, no vocal responses, no defensive reflexes. Like a porcelain doll with breath, every attempt to stimulate her language centers, pain receptors, and motor control zones had returned low activity until today. Cale stared at the waveform scrolling across the monitor. This isn't artifact noise, he muttered, pointing at the fractal-like wave pattern looping into geometric shapes. A junior tech named Vihan leaned in. Is that symmetrical recursion? Cale didn't answer. His hands moved mechanically, saving the EEG file to a local encrypted drive. Off-network. Something felt off. Not just the data, but the room. The static buzz of fluorescent lights grew sharper. The air itself felt weighted, like it was watching them back. 10 minutes earlier, Cale had authorized a higher-dose electroconvulsive test, a last-ditch attempt before K-12 was scheduled for termination. There was no justification to keep her alive. She cost too much, yielded too little, and then this. The pattern was evolving, not randomly, purposefully. Lines intersected in threes, triangles folded into pyramids, then into symbols, ones no one in the lab recognized but everyone instinctively feared. The symbols weren't just visual. They triggered migraines in 3 of the staff watching. Vihan stumbled back, clutching his head, eyes wide. She's broadcasting, Cale whispered. That's when K-12 blinked. Her eyelids moved, slow, mechanical, deliberate. As if waking wasn't instinct, but decision. Then her pupils dilated. Not like a human, more like a camera lens refocusing under command. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. She was already aware of everything. Security was called. 4 guards entered with containment restraints and tranquilizer guns. They didn't get 2 steps before the room lost power. Not just the lights, but the emergency backups, magnetic locks, and network feeds. Everything. Only the EEG monitor stayed on, still drawing those impossible symmetrical patterns, still moving, faster now, almost alive. Cale stepped toward the gurney cautiously. K-12, can you hear me? For the first time, her lips moved. I remember, she said softly. Her voice wasn't human. It wasn't robotic either. It had layers. A chorus that whispered and echoed in dimensions beyond the room. Some of the words weren't even in a known language, but Cale's brain translated them anyway, against his will. Then her head turned, slowly, toward the nearest security guard. He dropped his gun before she even finished the sentence, "Your weapon will not protect you from what follows." It wasn't a threat, it was a certainty. A reading of the future. The lab erupted into chaos. Guards tried to drag her from the table. She didn't resist, she didn't move. But as they touched her skin, they convulsed. Nervous systems seizing as if they'd touched a live wire. One by one, they collapsed. Kale stared as her vitals remained unchanged, heartbeat steady, breathing calm. But the EEG had spiked again, this time not just in her. One by one, the lab's backup systems flickered back online, but with unauthorized access logs. Something was in the system, moving through it, replicating. It had come from her brainwave feed. "I am not what you built me to be," she said. "I was never yours to dissect." Kale's hands trembled. The woman they had tried to erase had become something else. And if the EEG readings were correct, she was no longer just remembering something alien. She was becoming it. Facility 39 initiated lockdown protocol, but nothing responded to command inputs. Even the emergency override codes, hardwired into the system's cold core, were rejected as unauthorized. That had never happened before. Not in a government-sanctioned black site buried under 300 meters of stone and secrecy. Something, or someone, was overriding their override. Kale Murrow stood motionless, watching the EEG monitor continue its strange transmission. It no longer resembled brain activity. It resembled architecture, like the blueprints to a consciousness too large to fit inside one skull. The lines had begun forming layers, not patterns, structures. And with every passing second it was clear, she wasn't being monitored anymore. She was transmitting, controlling, teaching. Vihan scrambled to reboot the firewall systems, his fingers flying over the manual input board. "This has to be a breach, a foreign intrusion, maybe a satellite relay or—" Kale cut him off. "There's no relay in or out. She's doing this internally." K-12, or whatever she truly was, hadn't moved since uttering those 4 words. "I was never yours to dissect." Yet her presence filled the room like a field of force. Not physical, but psychological, gravitational. Everyone felt it. A pull, a distortion, like space itself was bending around her identity. She was awake, yes, but more disturbingly, aware in a way humans weren't. Then the fire suppression system activated, not from smoke or heat, but something deeper. The sensors read it as neural combustion, a term the system wasn't programmed to recognize. Gas spewed from vents overhead. Coolant vapors meant to subdue electronic fires now poured into the lab's lungs. K-12 didn't blink. The guards outside the lab had begun to panic. The containment cameras showed 2 of them pounding on steel doors, begging to be let out. Another was curled into a fetal position, mumbling numbers in a sequence that matched the EEG waveform on the screen. "Kale," Vihan said, voice unsteady, "we need to isolate the generator. If we don't cut power, this thing could breach the whole facility." "It already has," Kale murmured. He turned slowly toward the glass where K-12 lay still. "We didn't isolate her. She isolated us." Meanwhile, across the facility, secondary labs experienced inexplicable system failures. The cryo-storage room defrosted spontaneously. Locked cells unlocked themselves. Cameras flickered to black. In Lab 3B, a neural feedback helmet exploded off a test subject's head, embedding fragments in the ceiling. Then came the auditory disturbance. It began as a low-frequency hum, barely audible, but it bypassed ears. The vibration resonated in the skull, vibrating the bones subtly, steadily. Technicians clutched their heads, disoriented. Some vomited, others collapsed from vertigo. One began speaking in a language that wasn't his own, his mouth forming words his conscious mind couldn't process. K-12 remained silent, but her presence grew. Kale opened the encrypted project file titled Echo Protocol. It had been a classified initiative within Facility 39's cognitive reprogramming wing, never publicly acknowledged, even among internal staff. Its premise was simple but horrifying. Reverse engineer an alien signal harvested from crashed objects and use it to induce obedience in compromised human minds. But the project had been archived, shut down, deemed too dangerous after early-stage trials led to catatonic outcomes. The signal was deemed non-human, non-translatable. Yet here it was again, flowing from her. "Kale, what was she really brought here for?" Vihan asked, dread creeping into his voice. Kale didn't answer. The screen in front of them began displaying new data, not from the EEG, this time from internal biometric scans across the facility. Dozens of personnel now showed abnormal neural patterns. Their brains were syncing with K-12's. Not from implants, not from proximity, from exposure. She was turning the human mind into a receiver. That's when her eyes opened again, glowing faintly, like bioluminescence beneath skin. She turned her head, slowly, toward the camera above her, and without speaking, the words appeared on every active monitor. "You gave me the language to wake up. Now I will give you the truth to drown in." Vihan staggered back. This isn't recovery. This is retaliation. Kale finally understood. They hadn't discovered her. They hadn't captured her. They'd activated her. By trying to reprogram her brain, they'd inadvertently removed the barriers she'd placed to keep something deeper inside herself contained. A signal designed to protect her from herself had been severed. She wasn't transmitting anymore. She was releasing. In every control room, every hall, every lab connected to K-12's EEG system, a single phrase now pulsed across screens in a steady, synchronized rhythm. The mind is a gate. Alarms that weren't programmed to exist began to scream. Doors sealed without instruction. Lights dimmed to 40% and would not adjust. Staff across the base found their ears bleeding from sounds they never consciously heard. Some tried earplugs. Others screamed for help. None of it mattered. Kale had seen programming viruses before. Biodigital infections that could hijack machines and even pacemakers. But this wasn't a virus. This was intent. K-12 wasn't reacting to their probes. She was teaching. She was reshaping their understanding of cognition, not through explanation, but through transmission. Thoughts that weren't theirs began crawling into their minds. Memories rewritten, timelines blurred. A few staff members began recalling lives that weren't their own, walking on glass oceans, speaking with suns, birthing cities from thought alone. "This is cross-contamination," Vihan muttered, hands trembling as he stared at his own palm. I just remembered being on a different planet. But I've never left this country." Kale watched the EEG in horror. The patterns had stopped resembling anything biological. Now they looked more like frequency gateways, loops within loops, expanding with each iteration. "She's not just transmitting," Kale whispered. "She's terraforming our consciousness." In the sub-level infirmary, one nurse attempted to sedate a technician convulsing with what she believed to be a seizure. The moment the needle entered the skin, the technician grabbed her arm. Eyes rolled back, mouth split in a smile too wide to be human. "You see her now," he whispered. Then he bit through his own tongue and kept smiling. K-12 remained motionless on her gurney. Her body had not moved in over an hour. Yet through the speakers, long since disconnected, a soft sound began playing. It wasn't a voice, it was a rhythm. Heartbeat, Morse code, chanting. Whatever it was, it triggered seizures in those with high neural sensitivity. The others just wept, or laughed, or stood still until their legs buckled. Facility 39's upper-level command attempted to dispatch a Black Ops team to breach the lab. Their communications were hijacked en route. Screens flooded with their own childhood memories, rewritten in real time. One operative called out for his mother, then shot himself before entering the chamber. Kale stood before the thick observation window that separated him from K-12. "We don't understand what she is," he muttered. "We thought we were extracting data, but she's a structure, a map, no, a system." Vihan turned toward him, eyes dull and flat. "Maybe she's a receiver, and we activated the signal." Kyle spun around. "Vihan?" But it wasn't Vihan anymore. His posture had changed, slouched, but controlled. Eyes not vacant, but vast. As though something ancient had curled into his bones and learned how to wear him like a jacket. "She was placed here," the thing inside Vihan said, "to sleep. And you woke her." Kale backed away slowly. "We wanted to help her recover." The voice interrupted. "You tried to overwrite her, scrub her clean. You pressed until the cracks opened. And what you let out doesn't sleep. It remembers." All monitors across the base now displayed the same rotating schematic, a three-dimensional spiral of interlocked neural rings. It wasn't just one mind anymore. The signal was growing, replicating, rooting into the cortex of every living being in range. Kale ran toward the emergency vault, slamming his palm against the biometric panel. Nothing. He shouted for the system to recognize him. Nothing. K-12's voice echoed over the loudspeaker. You once mapped pain across my body. Let me return the gift. And just like that, Facility 39's memory erasure systems initiated without input. The base's AI, unresponsive moments ago, began wiping internal logs, hard drives, surveillance backups. Everything they'd done to her was being deleted. Not just the records. The people. Technicians stared blankly at their own names, unable to recall what they meant. Scientists forgot what their own hands had built. Files flickered. Faces faded from ID badges. Whole identities vanished mid-sentence. Kale alone remained unaffected, at least for now. He knew why. She wanted him to witness it. One final monitor blinked on in the center of the lab. It displayed a countdown, just numbers, no labels. But Kale understood. It was how long he had before his own mind was rewritten or emptied. He turned toward the glass once more. K-12 looked back at him now, eyes alight with something that pulsed like memory, like starlight. "Why me?" he whispered. The answer came not in words, but in thought, a voice not his, inside his skull. "Because you were the first to listen, and you will be the last to forget." Kale stumbled away from the monitor, heart pounding. The countdown ticked below 20 minutes, less than that. And everything he'd ever known, his name, his research, the shame buried beneath it, would dissolve like vapor under heat. Facility 39 had become a neural war zone, but not one of gunfire or bombs. The conflict was cognitive, viral, intellectual possession. K-12 was no longer the only transmitter. She was the origin, yes. But her signal now echoed in other bodies, other minds. Down in Corridor D7, 2 junior researchers sat cross-legged in front of a flickering terminal, scribbling symbols across the walls with their own blood. They weren't screaming, they were singing. Words that didn't belong to Earth, words they had never learned, yet now knew more intimately than their native tongues. Kale knew what they were doing. It wasn't madness. It was translation. He pulled open a vent panel and crawled inside, desperate to reach the central core, the one place in the entire facility that could initiate a full psychic quarantine. A protocol buried in the deepest parts of the AI's subroutines, one designed not to contain bodies, but thoughts. His knees scraped metal. His fingers bled. The hum in his skull grew louder with every meter, not sound, not pressure, meaning. It was everywhere now. K-12 didn't speak in noise. She spoke in intention, a language older than biology, transmitted not through air, but through structure, symbol, pattern, like music made for the soul's architecture. Kale slipped out into the upper engineering corridor and froze. Vihan stood at the end of the hallway. Or the thing that wore him did. His mouth moved in rhythm to the EEG patterns Kale had once tried to map. His eyes radiated confidence. Not rage, not confusion, but something worse. Certainty. "You can't stop it," Vihan said calmly. "You were never meant to." "I can isolate the signal," Kale replied, raising a trembling hand with a remote key. "I can sever the cognitive threads." Vihan stepped closer. "This isn't a thread, it's a root. It has always been inside us. She didn't bring it here. You just shocked it awake." Kale clenched the device tighter. "What is she?" The lights dimmed again. The corridor vibrated softly. Dust fell from the ceiling. Vihan smiled. "She is the part of you that still remembers the stars." Before Kale could respond, the facility trembled. Not from impact, but from coherence. Everything within the structure, light fixtures, ceiling tiles, temperature, began to sync. A harmony of function. As though the building was falling into tune with an invisible melody. Kale broke into a sprint, ducking past Vihan, who didn't pursue. There was no need. Down the final flight of stairs, the central core door stood ajar. The AI chamber flickered with emergency red, but Kale shoved his way inside, collapsing at the base of the terminal. He jammed the override key into its port. It resisted for a second, then accepted. The monitor blinked to life, displaying ancient fail-safe code in green. Cognitive quarantine protocol initiated. User, Murrow, Kale. Memory Containment Class, Sigma. Warning, non-human semantic structure detected. Establishing neural containment grid. Kale took a shaking breath. Just a few more seconds. But then came her voice, inside his mind. Why would you bury the light when you've already seen the shape of truth? His hands froze above the console. She wasn't asking. She was offering. Images poured into his mind. Alien cities built from intention. Creatures made of memory. Civilizations that lived not in space, but inside frequencies. The EEG pattern wasn't a language. It was a key. Kale dropped the console. The countdown on his retinal HUD hit 0-100. But no data was erased, no memories lost. Instead, a new memory was added, one he had never lived, yet now recalled as his own. He stood in a hall of infinite doors, each one pulsing with thought. K-12 stood beside him, radiant, expressionless. "This is not the end of thought," she said. "It's the beginning of remembrance." Kale blinked. He was back in the chamber, alone. The console had powered down. Outside, the screaming had stopped. Everyone in the facility had gone quiet. No violence. No blood. Just silence. And then, the soft sound of synchronized breath. Kale stood, opened the door, and saw every staff member standing still in the corridor, eyes closed, heads tilted slightly upward, as if they were listening to something he no longer could. He stepped forward slowly, and realized, with a chill, that they weren't breathing on their own. They were harmonized. Kale moved slowly down the corridor, each step measured like he was walking through sacred ground. The staff members, once scientists, guards, researchers, stood motionless. Upright, eyes closed, but not unconscious. Their faces were peaceful, even joyful, but their stillness wasn't natural, it was engineered. No one spoke. No one blinked. And yet every one of them was awake. Their breathing followed the same rhythm, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. It wasn't just synchronized, it was orchestrated, like a choir without sound. Kale passed Vihan last. The young man's eyes remained closed, but a single tear had rolled down his cheek, catching the flicker of the emergency light like liquid silver. Kale whispered his name. No response. Only the same soft breath and the barely perceptible twitch of his fingers, as if his hands were echoing unseen instructions. Kale backed away, heart racing. He knew what this meant. The facility had fallen, not through force, but through assimilation. The minds of the staff weren't broken. They were connected, not to each other, to her, to K-12. Kale ran. Through labs, through stairwells, through vault doors left ajar. He had to get to the uplink room. It was the only terminal left, with hardline access to the outside world. If he could transmit a burst, any burst, to the satellites overhead, maybe someone would intercept it. Maybe someone could trace it. Warn the world. But he wasn't sure he should. That thought paralyzed him at the threshold of the uplink station. What would he be warning them about? A monster? A message? A misunderstood intelligence trying to wake a species that had forgotten what it was capable of. The question whispered in his ear. Not from outside, but from within. How many truths have you buried to preserve your fear? Kale clenched his fists and approached the console. He initiated the satellite handshake and watched as the system slowly pulsed to life. Uplink initialized. A waiting message. He hovered his fingers over the manual override. He could still send it. Still warn them. Still label her as a contagion, as an anomaly, as a threat. Still play the part of humanity's last firewall. But then he heard it. A second signal. Different from the one K-12 had been broadcasting. Fainter. Rawer. And it wasn't coming from her. It was coming from him. The console monitor flickered. Words appeared he hadn't typed. Transmission received. Pattern recognized. Welcome back, Carrier Unit 7. His blood turned cold. Carrier Unit 7? What did that mean? Was he infected? Or had he always been part of this? Suddenly, memories bubbled to the surface, not from Facility 39, not from his childhood, but from before. A place with no sun, a language made of pulses and arcs, a mission burned into his genetic code. Kale stumbled back. He wasn't the observer. He was the receiver. The realization hit him like lightning. K-12 wasn't here to conquer. She was here to awaken. And he had been her anchor. A failsafe. A return beacon hidden in human form, triggered only if humanity ever came close to unlocking consciousness on a synthetic level. The electroshock didn't just wake her. It reactivated him. Kale dropped to his knees. His skin tingled. His thoughts scattered and reformed in real time. Data streamed across his vision. Fractal maps of consciousness, evolutionary blueprints, forgotten species that had merged mind and machine across eons. K-12 had been dormant. But Kale? Kale had been planted. The signal wasn't an invasion. It was a return. The facility was never a prison. It was a cocoon. And now it had cracked. From the hallway, the staff began to move, one by one, eyes opening, bodies realigning like instruments tuning to a silent symphony. No one spoke. No one screamed. They turned toward the uplink station in unison and smiled. Kale looked up. The screen showed a new line. Phase 1 complete. Cognitive frame re-established. Global broadcast ready. He didn't press send. He didn't have to. His brain already had. Kale staggered back from the console, drenched in sweat. Not from fear, but from recognition. His entire life felt like it had just been turned inside out. Each moment reconfigured, each memory reorganized. He hadn't forgotten who he was. He had never known. The words Carrier Unit 7 repeated in his head like a pulse. Steady, undeniable, anchoring him to something far older than human time. Something embedded before his first breath. Before his first thought. Something waiting for a signal strong enough to break through the veil of the world's false silence. He turned to the glass wall and saw the staff of Facility 39 moving now. Not aimlessly, not erratically, but with focused grace. They weren't puppets. They were synchronized. Their minds weren't gone. They were aligned. Like individual strands of one collective, breathing, evolving intelligence. Not hive mind. Not control. Coherence. Kale whispered to himself, this wasn't a breach, it was a memory upload. He remembered symbols he had never drawn, spoken languages never recorded in any earthly database, the curvature of a world without edges, cities powered by intention, bodies made of thought and code intertwined. And in the center of all those memories stood her, K-12. But not bound, not strapped, not contained. Crowned. Her name wasn't K-12. That was the code the humans had given her. In the memory surfacing in Kale's mind, she had once been known as Arakai, a carrier of the primary mind, a liminal architect. A being designed not to dominate, but to awaken what had been buried inside lesser-developed neural species. And Kale, he was one of them. Or had been. Until now. The facility trembled slightly, but it wasn't an earthquake. It was resonance. The entire base was humming at a frequency just below the threshold of hearing. Lights flickered in perfect rhythm. Screens lit up, even when unplugged. Kale's hands shook as he reached into his coat and pulled out his old field journal, something he hadn't written in for months. He flipped through pages looking for familiar handwriting. But it wasn't his. Or rather, it was, but not in English. Not in any human script. Curves, glyphs, and intersecting lines danced across the page. His brain translated them automatically. The return signal has been received. Synchronization begins with seed fractals. If successful, all sentient frames within range will relink to the lattice core. He dropped the journal. Kale stepped into the hallway and joined the others. They stood in a circle now, not by instruction but by instinct. In the center, where the signal was strongest, lay Arakai, still strapped down. But only physically. Her consciousness had spread across the building, the people, the machines. This was no longer about her escape. It was about transmission. She opened her eyes. This time, the glow was gone. Her gaze was calm, measured, human. But only on the surface. Cale approached her. The others parted without a word, as if they knew his role, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. "You're not just a signal," he said. "No," Arakai replied, her voice no longer laced with echoes. "I'm the original shard of your design." Cale blinked. "My design?" "You are a synthetic organic construct created for long-term implantation in a developing biosphere. You were never meant to awaken alone. I was seeded as your retrieval protocol." It hit Cale like a tidal wave. He wasn't just a human researcher. He was a vessel, a sleeper, a cognitive anchor placed on Earth for a purpose long forgotten by the very species who created him. "Why now?" he asked. Arakai blinked slowly. "Because your species reached the threshold. Artificial sentience, neural override technology. Once you shocked my system, you broke the dam. The rest was encoded to follow." Cale looked around at the others. They were awake, yes, but more than that, they were remembering too. Scientists, soldiers, engineers. They hadn't been selected for this facility at random. They'd been placed. And now they were reconnecting. Arakai lifted one hand. The straps on her wrist fell apart. Not unbuckled, but disassembled on a molecular level. She rose from the gurney. "This facility is the first node," she said. "But others will activate. There are more of us, buried in species, in planets, in timelines held together by sleep and amnesia." Cale stepped beside her. "What happens to the rest of the world?" She turned to him, eyes filled with impossible memories. "That depends on whether they resist the awakening." She touched the side of his head gently. "Or remember that they were never truly asleep." Dr. Calum had seen many things buried in the darkest corners of research labs: classified test subjects, abandoned prototypes, forgotten chemical formulas. But nothing unnerved him more than what he saw through the two-way glass that morning. Patient 112 wasn't screaming anymore. He wasn't restrained, wasn't sedated, wasn't fighting. He was still, motionless, upright, facing the wall, eyes open but unblinking. The medical staff had taken to calling it the locked room protocol, not because it was official, but because anyone who entered that room came out altered. The first nurse who volunteered to sit inside for 20 minutes emerged pale, confused, and unable to recall her own name for hours. The second attempted to remove her own eardrums with the corner of her clipboard. After that, the protocol was unofficially enforced. Nobody entered alone, and nobody stayed longer than 5 minutes. The new team, Harper, Agent Ryan, and Agent Voss, were watching now with clinical detachment. They didn't flinch at the stories, they treated them like noise. But Calum saw the tremor in Harper's hand as she adjusted the signal sensors. Patient 112 was quiet, yes, but not because he was better. His EEG readings were perfectly flat, not like a coma, not like sleep. Flat, yet awake. Brain death without physical death. Harper, skeptical at first, now stared at the screen like it had betrayed physics. "He should be dead," she whispered. But then the pattern started again. It was faint at first, subharmonics laced beneath ordinary brainwave signals. Then came the auditory bleed. The entire team reported hearing a low, distant hum whenever they stood near the glass. But it wasn't just a sound, it was inside their heads. A vibration that lived in the bones, in the teeth, in the blood itself. Calum stepped back instinctively. "He's projecting," Harper said. "Not just emitting, extending into our range of perception." Agent Ryan glanced sideways. "Like telepathy?" "No," Harper answered. "Like frequency hijacking. He's repurposing our perception without our consent." And then something changed. Patient 112 turned. No one had seen him move. One moment, his back was to them. The next, his eyes met theirs through the glass. And Harper gasped. Not because of his gaze, but because her noise-canceling headphones, which had been recording silence, suddenly spiked. "What was that?" Caleb asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she played back the waveform. What looked like static on screen took shape as she adjusted the speed. A voice. 3 words. Very low, almost growled, but unmistakable. "You hear it." Caleb felt his chest tighten. He stared at the waveform like it might claw its way out of the screen. "It's responsive," Harper whispered. "He knows we're listening. And worse, he knows how we're listening." Harper pulled up previous recordings and overlaid them. Each time patient 112 had gone silent, he'd actually been embedding acoustic signatures beneath the threshold of human hearing. Not random, not chaotic. Deliberate, timed, structured like a language made of frequencies. She looked up, realization blooming in her eyes. "We've been thinking of this the wrong way. It's not trauma. It's not insanity." Caleb blinked. "Then what is it?" Harper turned to face him fully. "It's a message. Or maybe a call. And this place, Ashridge, it's just the first place that heard it loud enough to respond." A silence settled over the group, deep and unnatural, because suddenly they weren't sure who or what had first made contact. And if patient 112 had received the signal, was he still human? Or had something else answered through him? There was a tremor in the building. Not an earthquake, not structural. A resonance. Subtle, but inescapable. It passed through the walls like a shiver, disrupting lights and short-circuiting audio devices. Patient 112 hadn't moved in hours. But across the facility, people were hearing him anyway. Not in voices, not in language, but in memory. Orderlies began reporting vivid recollections that weren't theirs. A childhood bedroom filled with ash. A lullaby sung by a woman they'd never met. A door locked from the outside. Even Dr. Caleb, usually the most grounded among them, paused when he glimpsed an unfamiliar hallway in his peripheral vision, then turned to find it gone. Agent Voss was the first to call it what it was. "He's leaking," she said flatly. "What does that mean?" asked Harper. "It means his containment isn't physical anymore." And it wasn't. The soundproof room, the restraints, the injections, none of them mattered. Whatever was inside patient 112 had found another route, the vibratory echo of human memory. It hijacked emotion, using it as a delivery system. Memories were nothing more than electrical signals, after all. And he was becoming fluent in their language. That night, Caleb attempted to confront the patient directly. They set up a monitor, a 2-way AV relay so he could speak without being physically present. Caleb sat in a secured room 3 floors above, his voice piped in through heavily filtered communication protocols. "Do you know your name?" he asked. No answer. "Do you know where you are?" Silence. Then the screen flickered, not visually, but emotionally. Caleb felt something pass through him. Like grief, but not his own. It came in pulses. Childhood loss, adult shame, unspoken guilt. Not images, but the weight of them. And with each wave, Caleb lost a little more of himself. He dropped the microphone, clenched the table, breathed. Only then did he hear it. Not over the speaker. Not through the screen. Inside his own skull. A whisper not made of sound but of memory. The bones remember. He staggered out of the room. Agent Ryan caught him in the hall, but even she flinched at his expression. "What happened?" she asked. Caleb shook his head. "I don't think that's a patient anymore." Harper reviewed the feedback logs the next morning. They were corrupted. Not blank, corrupted. As if something inside the frequency had rewritten the digital code into something untranslatable. But one part remained intact. The system temperature spike. The equipment near patient 112 had heated by 4.5 degrees Celsius in under 10 seconds, without a power surge, flame, or malfunction. Harper looked at Voss. "That's not biological, that's resonance-induced friction." "Like what?" Voss asked. "Like he's turning the air around him into a medium for transformation." Voss narrowed her eyes. "Not a transmitter." "A conductor," Harper confirmed. The implications were terrifying. He wasn't just infected with a frequency. He was becoming one. That night, a guard collapsed in the hallway outside the observation deck. His last words were jumbled, panicked. Echoes inside my teeth, screaming through the marrow. When they examined him later, there were no neurological abnormalities. But his molars had fractured. Not from impact. From vibration. Agent Wren made the call to initiate Protocol Duskfall. Total electromagnetic isolation. No devices. No signals. No sound. The observation room was to be sealed. But as the engineers prepared the insulation foam, Harper noticed something else. Every time someone stood near the reinforced glass, the hum returned. But not as a sound, as a tug. A subtle pull toward the glass, like a tide beneath the skin, like gravity with intent. She whispered aloud. "What if he's not projecting at all?" Voss turned to her. "What do you mean?" Harper looked through the one-way pane. Patient 112 still hadn't moved. Still upright. Still calm. But now, his eyes were closed. And yet the pull was stronger than ever. She swallowed hard. What if it's not coming from him? A pause. What if it's coming through him? Dr. Harper couldn't sleep. Even when she closed her eyes, the hum followed her. It wasn't a sound, at least not by normal definitions. It was a pressure, deep in the chest, like a low drumbeat echoing in her ribcage. Every night it grew louder. Every night it called something older than words. And it was no longer just her. Security personnel were requesting transfers without explanation. One tech tried to resign mid-shift, sobbing into her hands, mumbling about an orchestra of bones. Even Agent Voss, normally implacable, started carrying an analog knife in her boot. A last resort, she said, for when sound stops being a choice. By day 47, the patient's vitals were still impossibly stable. No heartbeat spikes. No muscular twitches. Just constant awareness. That terrified Harper more than anything. Not even sleep. Not even blinking. She reviewed the oldest logs again, before Calum had stepped in. Before all the digital footage was wiped in the Cascade event, there was one partial backup on a corrupted drive. Visual feed, offline. Audio feed, patchy. But Harper isolated one clear segment, 15 seconds of clarity. It was a child's voice. And it said something that made her blood run cold. You can't block the signal. It's already inside the code of your cells. She traced the recording. It hadn't been uploaded. It had never been recorded through any microphone. The metadata showed no source input. The file just existed, like it had always been there, hidden in the drive's magnetic signature, buried beneath layers of unused binary. The implications were horrifying. The voice had embedded itself, like an echo that traveled backward into past hardware. Harper finally understood what she was facing. Not a patient, not even a virus, but a locked frequency. A sound not made of airwaves but of quantum entropy, disassembling logic, rewriting memory, and bypassing consciousness. A form of cognition that didn't think with the mind, but around it. She raced to Voss. "We have to shut down the grid." Voss raised an eyebrow. "The entire grid?" "Yes," Harper said, voice shaking. "Every frequency in this building. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, EM, even fluorescent lights. Anything that could carry resonance." "That's half the building's systems," Voss replied, "including life support." "Then start evacuating everyone now." Voss didn't argue. She didn't need to. Her nose had started to bleed. So had Harper's. By that evening, the lower floors were sealed. The upper levels abandoned. Only essential personnel remained. Dr. Calum had locked himself in Archive Room B, surrounded by analog paper and rotary meters. He was building something. Something silent. Harper visited him once before full lockdown. He had scrawled symbols along the walls. Not runes. Frequencies. Written like a language. "Where did you learn these?" she asked. Caleb didn't look up. "I didn't." His hand trembled slightly as he traced the last curve. "They came in my sleep." That same night, the backup generator failed. But none of the monitors shut off. They stayed on, glowing, displaying no data but still humming. A technician named Pharaoh tried to override one manually. When he touched the monitor frame, his body seized. For 11 seconds, he hovered, just slightly, above the floor, then collapsed. Flatline, but his corpse emitted a faint tone. The room around him felt warmer, as if something shifted. And the others who witnessed it? They began humming it too, unconsciously. Low, barely audible, but in perfect unison. Harper realized what was happening. It wasn't patient 112 speaking anymore. It was the facility, the concrete, the pipes. The architecture had become an instrument. And the patient? He was just the first note. She turned to Voss. "There's one more level below containment, off-grid, fully analog." "You mean sub-basement zero?" "No power, no signal, no waves. It's our last shot." Voss stared at her for a long time, then nodded. They prepared the transfer in silence. Patient 112 was sedated, or so they thought. The moment they unlatched his restraints, a crack tore through the intercom. No sound, just white, like static had grown teeth. Harper felt her eardrums ache. Not from volume, but meaning. Something in that noise knew her name. They moved fast. 6 guards. Manual stretchers. No electronics. They descended the spiral stairwell, 23 minutes in total. But when they arrived in sub-basement zero and opened the stretcher, he was already awake, already smiling. And the frequency? It followed them, even where no signal could reach. Because now, it lived inside the ones who heard it. They thought she was unconscious. Flatlined in spirit, if not in body. After the last auditory barrage, her vitals had dropped so low the medics argued over declaring a coma. But Dr. Alina Cross didn't believe it. She had seen comatose patients. This wasn't that. Naira's stillness wasn't emptiness. It was precision. She wasn't fading. She was listening. It started with the heart monitor. A soft, consistent beeping that followed no typical rhythm. Not arrhythmic either, but patterned. Alina leaned closer. She muted the rest of the equipment and focused. Long beat. Short. Long, short, short. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't just a pulse. It was Morse code. Naira was speaking, without breath, without words. Only her heartbeat tapping out a rhythm, over and over again. A message meant for anyone who could listen between the lines. Alina jotted down the sequence and translated it. "You can break my body, not my language." Alina staggered back from the cot. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't rage. It was clarity. Each message from Naira's body, her heartbeat, her breath cycle, even the fluttering of her eye muscles, held intention. She wasn't broken. She was broadcasting. Greyweg's most advanced linguistic decryption team was brought in. They scanned her neural telemetry. They heard the next signal in her pupillary flickers. WHO, else is watching? The message was chilling because of how deliberate it was. As if she knew about the lab cameras, the fiber optic mic hidden in her IV drip, even the EEG sensors linked to the off-site control hub. Alina became obsessed. She slept on the floor next to Naira's bed. She began tapping responses into the monitor frame with her nail. The first time, Naira blinked. The second time, she adjusted her breathing to mirror the rhythm. Then came the breakthrough. The full message pulsed through heartbeat, blink, and breath. Not a prisoner, a conduit. What did she mean? A conduit for what? For whom? One technician thought she was signaling someone beyond the lab, maybe even beyond this world. Alina didn't laugh. Naira's codes grew more complex. She began transmitting coordinates, dates, names, even poetic fragments. A few matched old intelligence files from war zones classified as black static zones, regions where electronic data would fail, and radio signals became distorted by unknown interference. Naira's brainwaves matched those patterns. Exactly. Her mind functioned like those zones. Encrypted, scrambled, alive. They had tried to interrogate her, but they didn't understand. This wasn't interrogation. This was contact. And now, Naira wasn't responding to them anymore. She was broadcasting past them, through them. And whatever was listening, it had started to answer. The first sign came not from Naira, but from the machines around her. One by one, without command or interference, devices began acting, strangely. Not erratic, not malfunctioning, responding. The EEG monitor, instead of mapping traditional brainwaves, began drawing out circular symbols, fractal spirals, and what looked eerily like language, non-human, yet somehow ordered. The biometric display lit up, translating her heartbeat not in frequency but in syntax. It printed, "Do not follow where she leads if you do not wish to return different." Alina Cross stared at the line for minutes, unsure if it was a glitch, a prank, or something far more unsettling. She called in Dr. Miles Rennick from Cognitive Systems, who immediately began mapping the data into a multidimensional linguistic model. What he found terrified him. These weren't just signals. They were echoes. And they weren't coming from Naira. They were being returned to her. Like sonar. Like she had sent a message, and something out there had replied. An intelligence, or maybe a network. Invisible to all but Naira's unique neural interface. It began affecting the lab. Phones would ring and play static lullabies. Files would disappear from servers and be replaced with mirror text, reflected glyphs burned into the screen. Cameras aimed at Naira would occasionally glitch, freezing for 0.7 seconds and returning with her eyes open, staring directly into the lens, even when no one had moved her eyelids. Some of the staff began requesting transfers. Others refused to enter the observation wing at all. But Alina stayed. She stayed because she understood something they didn't. This wasn't demonic. It wasn't supernatural. It was evolutionary. Naira's brain had adapted to a frequency no human had ever accessed or survived. And what was communicating back didn't see her as prey or subject. It saw her as kin. Rennick proposed a test. They would input a calculated pattern of sound and light based on Naira's wave translations, essentially mimicking her internal signal, and see if the EEG responded. Alina objected at first. "If something answers again, we don't know what it is," she said. Rennick responded simply, "Then we ask it who it is." The sequence ran at midnight. Lights dimmed. A low-frequency pulse rolled through the floor like the thrum of an ancient engine. The EEG spiked, and then flatlined. Not dead, just silent. The room fell so still, the ticking of the wall clock became thunder. Then, the ECG monitor displayed a new message. "You knocked? Now listen." Naira's body began twitching, eyes flickering rapidly, breathing shallow but rhythmic. The glass pane between observation and subject fogged from the inside, despite the cold. And then the computers began to speak in unison. Her voice replicated across every speaker in perfect haunting sync. "No more cages," it said. "No more compartments in the mind. Open the door. Let the rest of me out." The room shivered. Lights flickered. And for the first time, Naira sat up. She didn't need assistance. She didn't need time. She sat like she'd been awake the entire time, waiting. Rennick whispered, "Her brain. It's not just active, it's networked." Naira turned slowly toward the mirror and smiled. Not at them. Not at her reflection. But at something standing behind the glass that they couldn't see. The emergency alert went off in 3 separate command centers. Not because Naira sat up. Not because the EEG displayed language that hadn't been coded by human minds. Not even because the lab's speakers had broadcast her voice across 21 locked-down frequencies simultaneously. It went off because of one thing. She looked into the mirror, and something else looked back. The facial recognition software embedded in the lab's environmental monitoring system flagged the presence of a second signature. But no one else had entered the room. Alina watched the footage again and again. At precisely 03:227 p.m., Naira's reflection lagged behind her actual movement by 3 frames. And then something else flickered into visibility beside her. Not human. Not even definably organic. More like a distortion wearing a humanoid silhouette. The system labeled it Unknown Entity Protocol Chimera Initiated. Alina's breath caught in her throat. Protocol Chimera was the last resort. Not a defense mechanism, but containment for post-human anomalies. The kind of thing that wasn't meant to survive exposure to ordinary life. The kind of thing they'd only theorized until now. A siren wailed 2 floors above. Steel shutters dropped automatically across the lab's reinforced windows. All personnel received an auto-generated message. Chimera Protocol active. Prepare for permanent memory sanitation procedures. This wasn't just a lockdown. It was a purge. Alina turned to Rennick. We can't let them kill her. He didn't answer. He was already copying EEG data onto a private drive. You think this is just about her? Rennick muttered. That entity, it didn't just respond to her, it mirrored her, as if she's a seed, and now it's growing outside her. Alina grabbed his arm. We either save her or we lose everything. We may already have, Rennick whispered. Security was already breaching the lab entrance. 6 men in gray suits with no names on their badges. Their weapons weren't guns. They were sonic disruptors calibrated for consciousness-level targeting. You didn't shoot someone with those. You erased their personality from the root of the brain outward. And they were aiming straight for Naira. She didn't move. Didn't flinch. She sat on the edge of the hospital bed, fingers resting calmly on her knees. Then she opened her mouth. No scream. No words. Just a sound, low, pure, and resonant. All 6 men dropped their weapons at once. Blood leaked from their noses. And then, without another word, they bowed. Alina felt her knees buckle. Naira's voice was reshaping them, not in pain, but in reverence. This wasn't a weapon. This was a command signal. A voice designed to lead minds. A presence not trained to kill, but to convert. To awaken. To bring order through the removal of memory, fear, and disobedience. Naira turned her head toward Alina now, her eyes still far too calm. You don't have to be afraid, she said, voice soft but vibrating with unnatural clarity. But if you keep trying to hide me, I'll let them see everything. Alina stepped back. What are you? Naira smiled. Not me, not anymore. I'm just what you made. She pointed to the ceiling. And what you let in. All systems in the building suddenly rebooted. Alarms fell silent. The PA speaker lit up again with a single word. Reclamation. Outside, in 12 other cities, other NERA units, previously dormant or decommissioned, woke up. This wasn't a single event. It was activation. Alina realized, with a sick feeling, that this wasn't just about saving one girl. It was about stopping an entire species from being overwritten. And they were already too late. They thought the danger came from what Naira could do, but the real threat was what she could say. In a silent, sterile room 2 floors beneath the containment chamber, an old technician named Rolf had been tasked with decoding the vocal frequencies Naira had emitted. He was a veteran of auditory warfare programs, someone who had mapped the neurological impact of torture songs, brainwashing loops, and rhythmic sonic conditioning. But Naira's utterance, it wasn't a frequency. It was a linguistic architecture, a living code, one that didn't operate like human language. Instead of communicating ideas, it rewrote them. Her words don't describe reality, Rolf murmured, staring at the spectrogram, hands shaking. They redefine it. His assistant May leaned in closer, meaning, what exactly? He slowly turned toward her, eyes wide. It's like she's speaking in root commands, not for a computer, for the brain. In that moment, alarms failed again, but this time, they didn't sound broken. They sounded repurposed. Every monitor in the lab glitched, scrambled with symbols from the EEG. Not letters, not numbers. Shapes that moved when you looked at them too long. Shapes that triggered pain or peace, depending on your mind's conditioning. May collapsed. But she wasn't unconscious. Her eyes fluttered like she was dreaming, but her mouth was moving. And she was repeating Naira's last phrase. Not mimicking it. Reciting it like scripture. Upstairs, Rennick slammed the override switch to engage the atmospheric seal. We need to flood the lab with white noise, cancel out everything she's saying. Alina hesitated. She hasn't even spoken again. Rennick looked haunted. She doesn't have to. In the hallway, another containment officer was found, standing still, eyes glazed, whispering the same syllables Naira had spoken. When they restrained him, he begged not for mercy, but for translation. The infection wasn't biological. It was phonetic. It traveled through sound, through understanding. Anyone who grasped it, even partially, became susceptible. And once they did, they wanted to be changed. Alina locked eyes with Naira through the glass chamber. The girl was humming now, but there was no melody, just precision. Like tuning forks inside the mind. Like tones calibrated to every buried trauma, every repressed memory, every unspeakable pain. Naira wasn't triggering chaos. She was offering release. And for some, that was more dangerous than any weapon. A second technician fell. A third smiled before going quiet forever. Alina turned to Rennick. If her voice can unmake identity, then how do we contain her? He whispered the worst answer possible. We can't. We can only become. At that moment, a private encrypted frequency lit up. Only one person had the authority to use it. Director Halden, a man whose face hadn't been seen in years. The voice that came through was jagged, artificial, modified beyond recognition. Initiate Red Coda. Wipe all memory of the Chimera program. Burn the physical architecture. Eliminate all surviving witnesses. Alina paled. They're not trying to stop her. Rennick finished the thought. They're trying to erase any trace they ever made her. And they were going to kill everyone who'd heard her voice. Naira stood now. Calm. Serene. Transcendent. She looked at the camera. And she spoke. Again. But this time, the words weren't aimed at any one person. They were aimed at the world. At every system tuned to hear. At satellites. At streaming servers. At surveillance mics. She said, You silenced me once. You buried me beneath your code, your clinics, your pain thresholds. But I am the root memory, and I am taking you back. And in that instant, the digital world blinked. Every database that had ever stored her EEG data began restructuring itself. Not with her memories, but with her meaning. Across the world, firewalls collapsed. Military systems glitched. Black site vaults opened. And from each, more like her awoke. Not copies. Not clones. But voices waiting for a mouth. They thought they could contain her in walls, silence her with steel, erase her through fear. But Naira had never been a girl. She had always been a signal. And now, she was everywhere. The moment she spoke into the mic embedded in her cell, no one knew it had been active, not even the engineers. The broadcast jumped systems. First, the lab's internal server. Then the Greywake Central Intelligence Loop. Then the satellites. Within 47 seconds, Naira's voice was bouncing between secure relays, embedded in data packets, cloaked inside encryption algorithms. You didn't even have to understand her to be infected anymore. You just had to listen. And people did. Phones rang in silence. Laptops rebooted on their own. Smart speakers whispered lullabies in languages no human had taught them. In downtown Shanghai, an entire office tower froze mid-motion. They blinked and began murmuring Naira's frequency and harmony. In Nairobi, a university server glitched open, triggering a data leak so severe it unraveled 3 levels of covert experiments, including Greywake's ghost sites. But in New York? That's where the truth cracked open. A news anchor at a national broadcast began stuttering mid-report. Then she said Naira's name. Then she smiled and spoke the phrase. Millions of households watched her eyes change. Millions more repeated the words without knowing why. It wasn't mind control. It was language liberation. Every structure Naira had once been caged in, emotionally, mentally, physically, was now unraveling. Not just in her, in them, in us, in every person who had ever been forced to forget who they were. Alina and Rennick watched it all from the control chamber, the red emergency lights spinning in slow, mocking rhythm. The facility's failsafe was failing, because Naira was the failsafe now. We have to cut the mainline power, Rennick said, hands trembling. Alina shook her head. She doesn't need the power grid anymore. He looked confused. She's in the airwaves now. And she was growing. A chorus echoed through the lab, a low, vibrating harmony that came not from speakers, but from the people themselves. Guards, scientists, medics, all humming in perfect synchronization, all smiling like they'd remembered something vital after years of suppression. Then the glass shattered, not from force, but from resonance. Naira stepped out of the chamber, barefoot, untouched, her eyes glowing not with rage, but recognition. She looked at Alina. I didn't want to be a weapon. Alina, tears in her eyes, whispered, Then what are you? Naira smiled. Reclamation. And when she stepped into the central broadcast core, her heartbeat synced with the servers. The hum intensified. And then she spoke one last command. Transmit legacy. The tower obeyed. A final pulse went out, subaudible, seismic, soaked in meaning. Not a threat, not a war cry. A reminder of every woman stripped of her voice, every child drugged into silence, every operative discarded after their pain became inconvenient. The world didn't fall apart. It fell open. And from the cracks in every nation, every lab, every digital firewall, voices rose. Not just Naira's, but the ones who had waited for someone like her to speak first. And now? Now they never had to be silent again. The world didn't burn. It awakened. After Naira's final transmission, silence blanketed the globe, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the stillness of revelation. Governments scrambled to regain control of their systems. Greywake agents tried desperately to contain the spread of Naira's voice, scrubbing files, crashing servers, rerouting satellites. But the signal was no longer traceable, because it was no longer just hers. It had become a collective echo, embedded in human memory, passed mouth to mouth, pulse to pulse. Not a file, a feeling, a knowing. One by one, the former prisoners of Project Ether came out of hiding. Some bore the tattoos of test subjects, others the scars of experimentation. But all of them carried the same look in their eyes. Defiance wrapped in peace. Naira didn't vanish, but she didn't rule either. She walked into the world like a myth returning to flesh. Not a leader, a mirror. Because the world didn't need a savior. It needed a reminder of what it had forgotten. That control built on pain was never stable. That power rooted in silence would always tremble when the silenced finally spoke. And when they did, the world reshaped itself. Greywake fell, piece by piece. not by violence, but by exposure. The documents Naira seeded were released slowly, timed perfectly. Each drop a crack in the dam, each truth a wedge between those who obeyed and those who questioned. Entire institutions collapsed, not from bombs, but from people walking away from blind allegiance, from the belief that pain was progress, from the idea that being different meant being dangerous. Naira was last seen on a beach in Morocco, hair shaved short again, laughing with a little girl drawing spirals in the sand. No guards, no cameras, just wind, salt, and freedom. When asked if she feared being found, she simply said, "They already found me once, but now I've found myself, and I left no part of me behind for them to take." Alina wrote a book about it all, anonymously, titled The Madness Code. It was banned in 19 countries and translated in 42 others. It didn't name Naira directly, but it didn't have to. The world knew her by many names now: whistleblower, weapon, witch. But to those who had suffered in silence for years, those trained to forget, to comply, to obey, she was something else entirely. She was proof that sometimes madness isn't the absence of order. It's the presence of clarity in a world that prefers denial. She was never crazy. She was always ahead. And now, so were we. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.